Welcome back to our class on Old Testament backgrounds. We are up to week 3. And for this week and next week, due to the holidays and all, people already are traveling for Christmas and, of course, for the New Year's next week. So we'll be looking these 2 weeks at just some highlights. This week, geographic highlights, and then next week, cultural highlights. And so this will be something that I think will be fun. I think if someone doesn't have a great knowledge of the geography of the Bible, this will be a great little teaser, so to speak. This will give an overview and we'll relate some Old Testament passages with some of these different geographic highlights today. And then next week, looking at cultural highlights. We all may know certain things about some of the cultural stuff of the Old Testament, but we'll delve into that obviously more as we get down to the peoples of Mesopotamia, Transjordan, Anatolia, and Syria-Palestine, and Egypt during the month of February. But we will take a look at some highlights next week. And so looking forward to diving into this. Before we do that, let's take a look at Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 30. And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, obviously, this is a New Testament passage, but it still is very helpful when we're reading the Bible, whether Old or New Testament, to know where these places are. Tyre and Sidon are cities that are on the Mediterranean Sea, but north really of, or just not by much, but north of what we would typically think of as the Promised Land, north of Israel, and part of what was called Phoenicia. And this woman's called a Syro-Phoenician, and kind of a part of the Roman government's Syrian province, but from this area of Phoenicia. And this makes sense because that's exactly where Tyre and Sidon were located, or still are today. So as we read, then he said to her. So we have our geographic inputs from this passage. We have our geographic things that we are helpful to know about. And then it's helpful to know about the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles, which was not particularly good. But of course, with Jesus, all that really began to be changed. He does say first, we need to let the children be fed first. And he's talking about the Jews. It's not right to take their bread and throw it to the dogs. And by that, he's referring to the Gentiles. But notice what happens. She answered him, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. And so Jesus does the healing. He performs the miracle. He answers the request that she has for him and takes care of the daughter. We find throughout the New Testament that Jesus broke down cultural barriers. He broke down barriers between men and women. He really did change culture, and amazingly. And anywhere Christianity has gone, it has been good for women. It has been good for the down and out. It has been good for all people in that area. It may have taken some time, like it did here in the United States, for slavery to end, but the Christian influence is really why it did. And we can ultimately thank God, but we can thank Jesus Christ and his teachings and his willingness to talk to women, to talk to Gentiles, to do things that the Jews of the day really would not have done. All right, so that kind of is a little bit of an intro for both the cultural and geographic highlights. And next week, we'll look at Jesus with the Samaritan woman for our introductory New Testament passage. So today we're going to take a look at the physical geography. We're going to look at where the mountain ranges are, the valleys, the places where rain is, just the very physical nature of the lands of the Old Testament. And then we'll take a look at, we'll get into looking at the geography from more of a political, I guess you could say, political stance as we go through today's lesson. So first, let's just look at the actual physical geography of the Bible lands. Obviously, this map is a little bit bigger than just the places we read about in the Old Testament, but you can see the Alpine Himalayan mountain belt, and that's the purple. And so this obviously you can hear the word the Alps, you can hear the Himalayas in that statement, and you can see all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. This belt separates France from Spain and goes all the way through Turkey, all the way into modern day China. And then the orange, that's the Afro-Arabian Rift Valley. And so where the lowlands are. And you can see a little bit of that orange right there where Israel would be, along with the dark green there. And I'll put my cursor over on the screen. Hopefully, if you're watching the recording, you can see that. That is highlighting the Fertile Crescent. And this is the area from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from the Persian Gulf all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea. And when people would travel, they would need to have water while traveling, of course, food, and so they would follow that route. They would not cut straight across the Syrian desert. That would be a hard thing to be able to handle. All right, the next map shows precipitation, and the darker the color, obviously, the darker the green, the more rain there is. And then when you get down to the tan and the orangish tan, very, very dry. The Fertile Crescent on this map is marked by the diagonal lines. And so you can see that the Fertile Crescent flows right from the Persian Gulf up around to the north side of the Mediterranean Sea and down into what we know as the Promised Land, down into the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee area. So pretty neat there, but that has a lot of impact on the things that take place in Bible times. So when the Israelites go into Babylonian captivity or Assyrian captivity, they are driven quite a ways. You can see at if you look at the Syrian desert and go straight north, you'll see the area Padan Aram, and that is where Jacob spent a ton of time working for Laban. And just a lot of things really help us get a feel if we know our geography. All right, so let me move on here. The map on the left is just showing the high points and the low points in the area right along the east side of the Mediterranean Sea, sometimes called the Levant. And the valleys are in yellow. The high points are in green. And you can see some of the roads that would have been around even back in the Bible in the Old Testament times, the pathways that people would take to get around. And then in the next map, it shows some of the different areas politically. You can see Judah and Samaria. And then on the Transjordan, on the east side of the Jordan, you see Edom and Moab and Mishor, Ammon, Gilead, Bashan. And then up north, from our reading, you see Phoenicia. And you can see Tyre and Sidon up in there, and very, very cool. And the pink up at the top is Galilee. And so where you see the diagonal lines, so Judah is all that orange part at the bottom, but where the diagonal lines are, they're showing kind of the heartland. They're showing where most of the people were situated. And anyway, just a nice little map showing some of that. You can see in Samaria, in the heartland of Samaria, the heartland, the place where most of the people lived, goes right up into Megiddo and up to Mount Carmel, right there on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So just a lot of neat things to help us to understand the things going on in the Old Testament. All right, our next map here is showing the different archaeological sites, and we'll get into some biblical texts in just a minute. I thought this was interesting because of my studies, but you can see all over Mesopotamia, which is the land between the rivers. They're coming out of the Persian Gulf, going to the northwest, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers still are. We have two others mentioned in Genesis, when the Garden of Eden is being described, two that at least maybe changed names or maybe just have been dried up since then. But we have all these different archaeological sites, these different places where major important things have been found to help us understand culture, help us understand the way the people lived back in Old Testament times. Really, really neat, really, really fabulous. And then you can see the dotted line around the Jordan-Israel area, the box, and the next map shows what is in that box. And you can see all the different archaeological sites right in Israel and in Jordan. The red ones are what they're calling major excavations, and the green ones are less major, minor excavations, you could say, but you never know what you're going to find in these digs. I have several friends who have gone over and been part of digs over in the Holy Lands, and it's pretty, they all talk about what a great experience it is and how it helps them to understand all the labor, all the work that goes into finding these things that then we just go to, we just go to museums and we get to see this stuff. Not everything ended up underground, but we get the great benefits of the hard work of what these people do. And all these things help us to understand the Bible just a little bit better. All right, so there's some stuff that just has to do with the basic geography, the basic way that the land is. And now let's kind of look at it from a historical, political kind of angle as we look at the different things that took place throughout the Old Testament. And we're not going to try to hit all the different maps that you might have in a Bible atlas or anything like that, but we'll just hit some highlights, several from Genesis, and then we'll look at a couple things from the era of the Judges, Joshua Judges kind of era. And then we'll look at a few maps of the divided kingdom and when the kingdom went away. And so anyway, that's our little route for the rest of the class here. So this is showing Mesopotamia. This is showing, and that all that means is the land between the rivers, talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And then these are two possible locations for the Garden of Eden. I have always thought about the Garden of Eden being right down where you see the word Babylonia, Sumer, Akkad, somewhere, right between the Tigris and Euphrates, but closer to the south. But there's another location that several people think is possible up in Urartu, and it's the Urartian location. And I don't know that I'm pronouncing that correctly, but obviously the Garden of Eden could be up there as well. And then it's just showing way back at the beginning of history, the heartlands of Assyria and Babylonia. And those would continue to, there would be a lot of cultural things. Of course, this is a little bit past the Garden of Eden time when those would have become major cultures, but still just showing where those are in relation to the possibilities for the Garden of Eden. Several important cities are shown on the map. We've got Ashur, Assur, almost right there in the middle. South of that, we have the city of Akkad down in the Babylonian area. And then up above, Kala, Nineveh, Mari to the west on the Euphrates River. Just a lot of places, Carchemish upriver, even farther, but a lot of major places important to ancient Near Eastern history. And of course, all those things relate into the Bible. So our first passage for tonight from the Old Testament has to do with the Garden of Eden. Let's just take a look at this from Genesis 2, 10 to 17. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So this is before Eve is even created. This is the next paragraph will talk about how it's not good for man to be alone, and Eve will be created. And we know what ends up happening. We know that they give in to temptation, as all human beings do. And then we have the fall of mankind in Genesis 3, where they have sinned, and everything changes at that point. And we deal with that even today. We deal with the curse on the earth. The curse, we don't really deal with the curse on the serpent, but we deal with the curse on the earth. We deal with the curse on woman, and the curse on man, basically because of the curse of the earth. So we deal with that. We deal with death. We deal with decay. We deal with things not being the way they were meant to be. But in Christ, we know of the promise of how things are to be once again, and God will bring everything back to the way it was meant to be. We will be restored. Of course, all this from really a spiritual standpoint as opposed to a physical. But we'll see how all that looks once we get to the point where Christ comes back again. So that's our first passage for today from Genesis. Now here, I thought it would be interesting for us to note a little bit about what happened after the flood. And so after the flood, these are where the various descendants of Japheth, Ham, and Shem made their dwelling places. So the descendants of Japheth are where the orange squares are, the descendants of Ham, where the purple squares are, and the descendants of Shem, where the green squares are. So this is really pretty neat, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second, but just notice the general areas where at least they start to settle. In Genesis 10, verse 1, we read, These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. And then it goes through all of that, down from verses 2 through 31. And then in verse 32, the chapter wraps up by saying, These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. And so the descendants of Shem, I just want us to look at a little bit, because we often talk about the Semites. Those are the descendants of Shem. And so in the yellow, or it's not yellow, the tan color, and you can see at the bottom of the key to this map, Semitic. Those are where the Semitic languages are. And of course, right there, if you look up where Israel is at the east end of the Mediterranean Sea, you can see the language of Hebrew, and then South Levantine Arabic. And so the Arabic languages, Hebrew, of course, and things like that are part of the Semitic languages. And then you can see some of the other language groups down there at the key. And then the next slide just shows the history and the timelines of a lot of these Semitic languages. And you see the language of Akkadian. And we actually have people, I know a professor who reads Akkadian. And so when Akkadian tablets are found, usually they end up in the University of Chicago. One of my professors and friend, he ends up in Chicago maybe for a week or two in the summer and reads Akkadian tablets, because he has the ability to read them. He knows that language. And so Akkadian really is, as you can see, one of the oldest languages that we know anything about. The Babylonian comes out of that, and Assyrian, you can see right there with that. These are all Semitic languages. and very, very important. They're kind of the first of the Semitic languages. And then you see the East Semitic languages in orange, and things like Syriac, Aramaic. Part of the Bible is written in Aramaic, and so obviously that's an important language for people to have some familiarity with if they're going to be studying the Old Testament. Not much is written in Aramaic, but we have a little bit. And then if you go down to the West Semitic languages, the yellow, green, blue, and pink, or purple, whichever, that's kind of an in between, isn't it? But in the yellow, you see the Hebrew language. And notice the line, the Hebrew language line ends right around the time of Christ, or a little bit before the time of Christ. But then you see the dots after that, and that's because there are still people speaking Hebrew even today, modern Hebrew, and it's a little bit different, but in the synagogues, rabbis still know Hebrew. I had to learn Hebrew to be able to do my studies in the Old Testament, and so the Hebrew language is still being used, and that's why those dotted lines leading up right to the current day. So anyway, I just thought this was interesting for you. You may want to study a little bit more about languages and the history of the Semitic languages in particular, if you would like, or not, but you just see a lot of different neat things as you study these things. And there are lots of resources out there to help if you desire those. All right, so from Noah, we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The Semites come from Shem, and it's just obviously a dropping of the H out of his name, and that's the line that leads to Christ ultimately. So, all right, so we here have the movements of the patriarchs, and when we talk about patriarchs, we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And again, you can pause your video, look at some of the fine print on this, but if you see right up at the top, you see Abraham's migration from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran, and you see the line there. We're not sure where Ur of the Chaldeans is. If you look at the beginning of that line over to the right, to the east of where that top statement is, you see the region of Ur of the Chaldeans. So we're just not exactly sure where that Ur is. There's another Ur down in Mesopotamia, but most believe Abraham came from a different Ur than what we have down in Mesopotamia. So he ends up in Haran, and then he migrates to the Promised Land. And then it shows other movements of Jacob as well, and Isaac. So anyway, just really interesting things. I'm going to note what's written there in the Mediterranean Sea. I'll bring my mouse over and let you say. Jacob returns to Shechem after having lived in Padan Aram for 20 years. This is what he's working off, doing his labor for Laban, so that he, of course, he was tricked and had Leah as a wife first, and then, of course, was able to marry Rachel or Rebecca, pardon me, and or no, Rachel's correct. He's able to marry Rachel and then work 7 more years for her. So he works a total of 14 years. And then this is when he's coming back to the Promised Land. He's worried about Esau, as you might imagine. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, then Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. And Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So we see several things here. I will notice in verse 8, look at the last word of verse 8. He calls Esau my Lord. And of course, it's not capitalized. We talked about these different names that are used for God and different ways Lord is used in the Old Testament. And here's one where he's just saying, my master, he's being my sir. I I want to find favor in the sight of you, sir. Might be how we would word that today. But he's just being extremely polite and showing submission, no doubt about it. But of course, this is not referring to God as Lord or Master. So it's not capitalized and it's not in the small cap. So it's not referring to the personal name of God. But here's an example of just the regular use of the word Lord here. So pretty neat stuff there. I do want to drop down to verse 18 and read that for you. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And so I do want to compare that with the King James, and it's the same in that chapter 33, but this is a better place to see the comparison in Genesis 25:20. And we go back to his dad, back to Jacob's dad, Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel. This is from the King James, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And so when you see Syrian in the Old Testament, you do have to make sure you know the era that you're talking about and know the time, because really it's not called Syria yet. And so Aram is the word being used in the original Hebrew, and so Aramean and Padan Aram, the name of the city or the region. And so technically we should say Arameans. It's kind of like when the New Testament, the people translating from the Greek, are they going to use what the book of Acts has, which is Asia, or do they want people reading today to understand what they're talking about? And do they put Turkey? Well, almost always they say that Paul was in Asia. They don't say that he was in Turkey, even though to say Turkey might help people to understand where he was more specifically. Because when we say Asia, I mean, that stretches from Israel all the way over to Japan. And so when the King James translators were translating Genesis 25, they thought, you know what? People aren't going to know where Aram is. It's called Syria now, so let's put Syria. And so that's what they did. But it really is a debate. You don't know necessarily which would be best. I think it's best to stick with the original language, stick with what the Bible has, and then, hopefully if you're in a teaching situation, or you can put a note in the footnotes of the Bible, you can make a textual note just to say, you know what, this became Syria. That's the region that it was in. So there are lots of ways to do that, but I just wanted to show you that. So when you see Padan Aram, or you just see Aram or Aramean, someone from Aram, you'll know what that is. All right. So here's a map of the places that are noted in the patriarchal period. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and on the right side of your slide, you can see a blow up of the area where Jerusalem and Bethlehem are now. You see Salem, and that obviously that's the end of Jerusalem, but it was called Salem back in that day. Mount Moriah is where Abraham intended to sacrifice Isaac, right there on the Temple Mount, and right there in Jerusalem. And of course, God stayed his hand, or the angel stayed his hand, and he did not have to do that, which is awesome. But a lot of different things took place in the promised land with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, of course, they end up in Egypt, living in the land of Goshen, after Joseph saves them. And then when they come back and get into the promised land to permanently settle, they set up their tribes. And I particularly liked this map of the tribes because it shows the tribes and which mom they came from. And so the green ones are from Leah. And so, of course, you have Reuben and Judah and Simeon and Issachar and Zebulun. Issachar and Zebulun, the ones to the north, smaller tribes as far as land area. Judah being, of course, the son through whom Jesus Christ would come. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And then we have Leah's servant, Zilpah. Those are in the yellow. Gad and Asher. We have Rachel's. And of course, the tribe of Benjamin is right there. We're just north of Jerusalem, but the tribe of Benjamin is the little teeny one right there. And then there's no tribe called Joseph. They used his sons to name the land areas. And so we have Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's two sons, getting those names of those tribes. And of course, Manasseh is huge as far as land area goes, part on the west side of the Jordan and then part Transjordan on the east side. And then Rachel's servant, Bilhah, the purple ones, Dan and Naphtali. So anyway, I thought that was really cool to get to see it in relation to the moms or the lines through which these men came. So that's the 12 tribes of Israel, and you can find maps of these things, all over the place on the internet and probably in the backs of your Bible as well. All right. So in this map, this is part of the just excuse me, this map showing some of the movements of various people during the time of the judges. And you can see down at the bottom the route of Naomi and Ruth from Moab to Bethlehem. And anyway, just a really cool map. I encourage you to maybe pause the video here and check out some of the things in the fine print on this map. But one thing I did want to emphasize are the cities of refuge, which are talked about in Joshua and Judges. And you can note they're the ones with the cross, Kadesh at the very northern end of this map, Golan, Ramoth Gilead, those on the east of the Jordan, as well as Bezer. And then Hebron is down there in the south. Anyway, it's just kind of cool because they do play a part in our text. And I'm going to read about that in Joshua 20. Then the Lord said to Joshua, say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. They shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is high priest at the time. Then the manslayer may return to his own town and his own home, to the town from which he fled. And then they list these cities. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, and Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. And beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho, they appointed Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland, from the tribe of Reuben, and Ramoth and Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan and Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. These were the cities designated for all the people of Israel, and for the strangers sojourning among them, that anyone who killed a person without intent could flee there, so that he might not die by the hand of the avenger of blood, till he stood before the congregation. So just even something as simple as this um, is something that really helps us to understand when we look at the geography of the land. They had these spaced out among the nation so that no matter where someone might have made a mistake and killed someone without intent, it says, they could flee to one of these cities. So pretty neat and just an interesting little side point. But everything helps. You notice the tableland, the hill country. If you know the geography, if you know the land, all those things make more sense. And then another thing that I thought was cool was to kind of take a look at the Ark of the Covenant, and for a couple reasons, and I'll share that in just a minute. But again, the path of the Ark of the Covenant, when it was an Israelite possession, that's in green. In the Philistine possession, that's in orange. And you can read about all the different ways and the stories behind all these different movements of the Ark. But then finally, it ends up back in Jerusalem, and Solomon prays. It's a very notable moment when the Ark of the Covenant comes back home and rests in the temple. But I was really intrigued, and we didn't read from a prophet last week as we went through our text. Notice this passage from Jeremiah chapter 3. When you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land, in those days, declare the Lord, they shall no more say, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind or be remembered or missed. It shall not be made again. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all nations shall gather to it, to the presence of the Lord in Jerusalem, and they shall no more stubbornly follow their own evil heart. In those days, the house of Judah shall join the house of Israel, and together they shall come from the land of the north to the land that I gave your fathers for a heritage. And it's interesting, Jeremiah later in the book says this in Jeremiah 31, says, and remember what was just read, they shall no longer say the Ark of the Covenant. And here it says, they shall no longer each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. And so, under the new covenant, because of baptism into Christ, because of the gift of the Holy Spirit, because of God writing the law on the heart instead of the way it had been done on stone, because of the change, we don't need to be encouraged to know the Lord because we're going to know the Lord. And we don't need the Ark of the Covenant anymore because the covenant is in Jesus Christ. There is a new covenant, a new promise. And I just think all that is really, really cool. But it does help to know the geography to understand the route of the Ark. But I thought this was a cool thing to look at from Jeremiah. Okay. We have in this map David's flight from Saul, his offensive actions, and then finally becoming king. The orange is when he's fleeing from Saul. Saul wants to take his life. And I particularly want us just to note this area right here of En-Gedi. David mentions En-Gedi in some of his Psalms. Of course, it's mentioned in the narrative, just as far as him fleeing. There's a cave there you can actually still visit. Things are pretty much exactly like they would have been when David was there at En-Gedi. It's pretty neat. So, all right, we'll look at a few more maps here. This one is referring to or noting the extent of Solomon's trade around the world. At the far end, you'll notice Tarshish. And the people that made this map feel that that is the appropriate location, the southern part of Spain, right at the end of the Mediterranean Sea, well, where it ends and the Atlantic Ocean begins. But you'll notice that the squares are other possible locations for Tarshish, and we're just not sure. But this map maker, these editors, feel it's the farthest point away. But Solomon had a great ending to the United Kingdom period. And we'll just read a few verses about that. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that which the explorers and merchants brought. And all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the land brought gold and silver to Solomon. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of beaten gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 300 shekels of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps and a footstool of gold, which were attached to the throne. And on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions standing beside the armrests, while 12 lions stood there, one on each end of a step on the 6 steps. Nothing like it was ever made for any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon, for the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and all the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. And Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And he ruled over all the kings from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. And horses were imported for Solomon from Egypt and from all lands. Absolutely incredible stuff. A lot of place names as we go through that text. And so again, just an overview of the geography of the land. So the map on the left shows the divided kingdom. After Solomon, the kingdom divides. You see Judah and Israel in the pink, the southern pink, and the northern blue. And then you see Philistia, Moab, Edom, Ammon, Aram, and Phoenicia on that map. Once the and then on the right side of that map, sorry about that, on the right side we have once Assyria has taken the northern kingdom away. So Israel is no more, and all the purple, those are provinces of Assyria. And you can see Judah, and again with those slanted lines showing where most of the population was, the heartland of Judah. All right, the next map here is the Persian Empire. And you can see that in the green, those are the territories Cyrus gained by 539 BC. And of course, that includes taking Jerusalem and taking the southern kingdom, taking the Judeans over into Babylonian captivity. But then Cyrus of Persia takes over. They had been taken out about 50 years before that by the Babylonians, and then Cyrus gains that territory by 539 BC. Sorry, I misspoke there for just a second. All right, and then one more map for you, and this is showing the Greek empire, Alexander's empire, around 275 BC, and of course everything is Alexander's, and of course it's the Romans have it all by the time we get to the time of Christ. So, and I apologize there also if I misspoke. Anyway, hopefully those things just kind of whet your appetite. Hopefully you'll be interested in, when you read an Old Testament passage, checking out the maps at the back of the Bible, making sure you kind of get a grasp of the things that are happening at that particular moment of history. So thanks for your time tonight, and we'll look at some cultural highlights next week. May the Lord continue to bless us and keep us as we study his word.